Recently, the Taliban has taken the control of Afghanistan back from the US supported Afghanistan government. The Taliban took over Afghanistan almost as soon as the US military forces evacuated Afghanistan. The speed with which the Taliban has gained the control over the Afghanistan has came as a surprise to many. It was only recently, on April 14th, 2021, that the current US president has said that US plans to withdraw all its troops from the Afghanistan by 31st August 2021 and before September 11. By 2nd of July, the US and NATO troops had evacuated the Bagram Air Base, which was the largest military air base that the US had in Afghanistan, and it was also the center of US operations. This evacuation effectively ended the involvement of US and the NATO forces in Afghanistan and left the state of Afghanistan affairs on the hand of Afghan government and the Afghan military. But the Taliban, which was already making advances in Afghanistan, intensified its onslaught over Afghanistan military after this, and by 21st July, the US said that the Taliban has already gained the control of more than half of the Afghanistan districts. And by 6th of August 2021, the Taliban took over the city of Zaranj, which became the first provincial capital of Afghanistan, which had fallen to Taliban. Soon after, on 13th of August, the Taliban seized four more provincial capitals of Afghanistan, which included the second and the third most populous cities of Afghanistan, the Kandahar and the Herat respectively. And just 2 days after that, the Taliban captured the city of Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, and effectively took control of the entire country of Afghanistan. And on the same day, the president of then Afghanistan government flee from the country to Oman. As I've said earlier, the speed and the ease with which the Taliban was able to capture the Afghanistan back has came as a surprise to many. Most of the experts were under the impression that the Taliban would face a far more stiff opposition from the Afghanistan military forces than what they actually faced. As the Afghanistan military was far better equipped, it was more in number, and was far better trained than the Taliban. But the fact is that the Afghanistan military, which was trained and equipped by the US, offered a little resistance as most of the Afghanistan military personnel either surrendered or deserted. Now, this surrendering and deserting of Afghanistan military personnel explains why Taliban was able to capture a lot of areas in Afghanistan unopposed. So, what were the reasons as to why the Taliban was able to capture the Afghanistan so easily? Well, firstly, the way the exit strategy of the US was prepared, it anyways kept a consideration that the Taliban will eventually be taking the control of Afghanistan. Precisely, the US was expecting that it will take the Taliban about 6 months to gain control of the Afghanistan. However, in reality, it only took Taliban less than a month to capture back the Afghanistan. The US's consideration that the Taliban will take control of the Afghanistan in 6 months' time looks questionable to begin with, because it does not make any sense for the US to allow the Taliban to recapture Afghanistan, which the US had defeated in the aftermath of September 11, 2001, in order to take control of Afghanistan. It seems sloppy from the US's side that it did not negate the possibility of Taliban recapturing the Afghanistan while it made its evacuation plans. Rather, what should have been done by the US was to help in a formation of a stronger and a more stable government in Afghanistan, which would have been capable to handle the onslaughts from the Taliban. But instead, all that was there in the Afghanistan when US left was a weak government at center whose president ran away at the first opportunity when the Taliban made advances. So one of the reasons as to why the Taliban was able to take control of the Afghanistan so easily was the fact that the evacuation strategy that was followed by the US was haphazard to begin with, which left a weak Afghanistani government and other glaring loopholes for the Taliban to come and capture the Afghanistan back. Another factor which provides the explanation to why the Taliban was able to capture the Afghanistan back so easily lies in the fact that in a survey conducted by the Pew Research in 2013, it was found that around 99% of the Afghanistanis said that they want to make the Sharia the law of the land. And if this number is even close to correct, then it very well explains why the Taliban was offered a very little resistance in its endeavor to take the Afghanistan back. This is because most of the Afghanistanis were at least in some agreement to what the Taliban had to offer, which was the rule under the Sharia law. This also means that amongst a lot of Afghanistani people, as well as in some Afghanistan military personnel, there was at least some support to the Talibani ideology, and therefore most of such people would have offered a little to no resistance while the Taliban was recapturing the Afghanistan. So, can we make any guess as to how the Taliban rule in the Afghanistan will pan out in the future? Well, for Afghanistan, it is not unreasonable to estimate that this current rule of Taliban will be somewhat similar to their previous rule, which means that at least in the future, Taliban will again be ruling Afghanistan somewhat with oppressive Islamic fundamentalism. There doesn't appear to be any other reason as to why the current rule of Taliban will be significantly different from its previous rule. Another thing that can be said about the state of Afghanistan in the future will be the fact that historically Afghanistan has always been a country which has been marred with the armed conflicts amongst the various tribal and sectarian factions, and it does not look like that this conflict among the various factions will be impeding in the near future under the current rule of the Taliban. From the perspective of the US as to how the current Taliban rule will impact the US in the future, it can be said that the current administration in the US has repeatedly made it clear that they do not have any plan to meddle in the Afghanistan affairs anymore. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to assume that unless the US is disturbed directly, like how it was on September 11, 2001, US will not be paying any attention to most of what is going on in the Afghanistan. And since the scope of most of what will happen in Afghanistan in the near future will be limited mostly to Afghanistan and maybe to its neighborhood, US getting heavily involved again in Afghanistan directly is unlikely. And as I mentioned just now, instability, if any, in Afghanistan will be limited mostly to Afghanistan and will somewhat be spilling over to its neighborhood. Therefore, the neighboring countries of the Afghanistan will also have to deal with any tumultuous state of affairs in Afghanistan. The tumultuous state of affairs in Afghanistan will also mean that it is also likely that a refugee crisis might emanate out of Afghanistan, and most of such refugees will again have to be dealt by the neighboring countries. So, in the end, in essence, it can be said that the near future of Afghanistan will be gripped with the struggle and uncertainties.